This is Once Upon a Crime in Hollywood, the Ronni Chasen story. We left off with a frantic search for clues in the murder of Miss Chasen. A coroner's investigator visited the crime scene immediately, initially determining that Miss Chasen was shot by an unknown suspect who pulled up in a vehicle alongside her while she was stopped at the red light at Sunset Boulevard in Whittier. Let's hear what Lieutenant Tony Lee and Beverly Hills Police had to say in their first update to the public.
We don't have crimes like this in the city of Beverly Hills, so it is a surprise to us. We've got numerous investigators at the scene that are trying to piece this thing together. We don't have a motive at this time. We don't have any suspect information.
Sergeant Hoshino of the Beverly Hills Police Department added, "We haven't ruled anything out. We just don't know. It's a big whodunit. We have no suspects or no leads in this case at this point," he said. "We don't know if the window was shot or broken as a result of the accident. We don't know what the motive is. This is a fresh, active homicide," confirming that detectives had served search warrants at the home and business. Hoshino also told the New York Times the person could have been in the car, outside the car, could have walked up to the car, driven up. "We don't know at this point." Let's bring in Gil Carrillo, retired homicide lieutenant, 38 years with LA County Sheriff's Department. Can you explain how a crime scene is processed for a homicide of this nature?
From the time you get the call, you arrive at the location. The first thing you do, contact the patrol officer that was there long before you were. They will give you a general briefing as to how they got the call, what they've done, and what they have. You then walk in looking around, being very careful where you walk, where you step, and just making general observations as to lighting, weather conditions. And once you get general physical characteristics around her, then you start moving closer into, in this case, it was a vehicle, then you start moving closer into the vehicle while being sure to direct photographers to take any photographs that you may see of interest, not only overalls, but something you may want to point out or some piece of evidence you may find. You're just doing the looking. You're not touching anything. Then once you get beyond that, then you have somebody from the crime lab with you, and you're looking for any pieces of evidence that might be important to the case. And pieces of evidence could be anything from casings. When I say casings, I'm talking about bullet casings, cigarette butts, papers, receipts, anything that is out of the ordinary. Because you only get one shot at the crime scene. You do a meticulous investigation, and then you get to the body. And the body's the last thing you're going to get to because you're more interested and everything around the body. Once you get to the body, then you'll start looking for injuries, for wounds, how closely were the wounds, what the trajectory might be. You might look for trajectory with glass, if you have bullet holes as opposed to just a shattered, blown out window. You're looking for stuff like that, examining the body. Then the coroner gets there. The coroner will then pull the body out. They will take control of the body. And once they get it out of the vehicle, if it's in a vehicle, then they will lay it either on the ground or on the gurney, and you will examine it there. And they'll put something down. More than likely it'll be on the ground because they'll put a big sheet of plastic or whatever they have on the ground, lay the body on that so as not to lose any evidence that may be trapped in clothing. You'll examine, take notes, take photographs, and document everything, like I said, from lighting, weather, position of the body, measurements from the car to fixed objects like curbs and telephone poles, direction of travel, things like that. Once you're done, that's the crime scene.
Surveillance videos from several residents in the neighborhood also captured the crash on video. The same day Miss Chasen was murdered, Michael Levine, a fellow publicist and friend of Rodney, started a fund to raise $25,000 to find out her killer. Ronnie's colleague said the police went to her office, went through her phone records and computers. They also searched her home in Westwood, collecting computers, hard drives, CDs, and boxes of files. The next day, Harold Matzer, who ran Palm Springs International Film Festival, put up a $100,000 reward for information leading to the suspect. 4 days after the murder, the case made America's Most Wanted. Joining us, Steve Katz, former America's Most Wanted producer. America's Most Wanted was a key contributor to Chasen's investigation. What do you remember about covering the case in the beginning, and what details were immediately available to the public before the tipster came forward?
Well, it was pretty unusual to have a story on the air 4 days after the murder happened. Most of the stories that were on America's Most Wanted were cold cases that were unsolved for a long time and needed that extra little publicity push of having it on a national TV show. And it usually took us a good amount of time to put together the kind of story that we knew might get results. From the show was on the air quarter of a century, so we were pretty experienced at knowing exactly what to say and what strings to pull to get that a reaction from the audience, what to tell them. So we were aware of the case, but we were looking at it, and we started getting calls from our network. This was all anybody was talking about in Hollywood. We were based in Washington, D.C., and started to get calls. Hey, you got to put the story on this week. And then, Beverly Hills Police said, can you help us out with this? And we couldn't say no. That was the whole purpose of the show, is to help the public and help the police. So we put together as much information as we can. Not a lot was known, as you know. The Beverly Hills Police were as cooperative as they could be. They didn't know a lot at that point. It had literally just happened. So it was a little more than a news report, really. It was, here's who Ronnie was. Here's what happened as far as the police know. It was not that long a story. Stories on America's Most Wanted ran anywhere from literally 15 seconds to 20 minutes. This was on the shorter. It was more than 15 seconds, but it was a short piece, and it was it always ended the same way, with John Walsh, our host, saying, here's what we know, and if you could help, you can make a difference. You can remain anonymous. Here's our famous phone number, 1-800-CRIME-TV. And the idea behind the show since the beginning was any tips that came in did not go to the police. You weren't talking to the cops. If you were afraid to talk to the cops, you were talking to a civilian like you. Our operators were all pretty well trained. They knew what to ask. They knew, how to elicit the information. And they also had a pretty good sense of what was real and what wasn't when a call came in. So when a tip comes in on any case, it's immediately handed over to the police. That America's Most Wanted was a TV show. We weren't an investigative unit. We weren't sworn law officers. We were a TV show that was collecting information and immediately handing it over to the police with the understanding, the hopeful quid pro quo is like, you're going to tell us what's going on, right? Because we're helping you.
Did they?
So night,
did they tell you?
Right. No, it depends on the case. I mean, there's cases where we've had to tell the police, and I don't want to mention any in particular, like, hey, don't tell us that. You really shouldn't be telling us that, because we were just such a partner. It was such an unusual situation for a television program to be a partner like that with law enforcement. And they knew, yes, we were an entertainment show. We worked in the entertainment division of Fox, but we were doing a public service, and the police knew where we were coming from. They knew where John Walsh was coming from. So that night that we ran that piece, it was 4 days, as I said, after the murder. We were on Saturday night at 9 p.m. And we got a couple calls. It can go anywhere from like hundreds of calls on a case to one call to no calls. I always used to say we're entertaining 6 million people and talking to one that is the one that we want to call. So we did get a call, and from a very nervous guy who didn't really want to tell us too much. He just said he saw the show, and he had this feeling that this person living with him might be involved, but he was afraid to say any more. And the operator, of course, with the training, tried to get him to say, what's the guy's name? Where does he live? Where is he now? That kind of thing. He was hesitant to say too much. but he promised to think about it and call back. And so that we would know that it was him calling back, he said, why don't we come up with a code name? And that way I'll give it to you and you'll know it's me calling and not just somebody claiming to be me. So he told us he wanted just to be called Nine of Hearts. That was the code, that it was him. So we hung up. That tip, along with whatever other tips we got that night, were passed along to the Beverly Hills Police. I'm sure they looked at it and said, that's interesting. We'd like to know more from this guy. Who was he talking about? And he's not very specific about, other than saying he thinks that somebody in the same building with him might be involved. We felt the same way. And we just waited. We waited. And then a couple days later, the phone rang, because that hotline was 24/7. It wasn't just on Saturday nights. And the guy calls and says, hey, it's Nine of Hearts. I go, whoa. And he said, I thought about it, talked to people about it. Everyone told me I'm crazy, but here's what I know. And I think you know the story. It's been told a couple of times now. He just said, was in my apartment here in the Harvey Apartments. And I'm kind of like down and out musician. And one of my fellow apartment dwellers, the night that this murder happened, came into my apartment and said, have the police been here? And I said, no, I'm speaking in his voice. He said, no, I said, no, the police haven't. He goes, you sure the police haven't been here? I kind of wouldn't know if the police had been here. And he goes, okay, this conversation never happened. And then he just bugged out. And the tipster said he was very polite. He just seemed very nervous. But he was kind of like one. The Harvey Apartments, I don't know if you've talked about the Harvey Apartments yet. It's kind of a mixed residence, as the tipster described it, everything from students to hopeful musicians like himself and people on public assistance like himself, to families working 5 jobs to make it. It was just a mixture. It wasn't the Palace, and it wasn't Skid Row. It was kind of like halfway in between. The apartments weren't very, very expensive. I think he was paying like $650 a month or something like that for his apartment. And then the next morning, he told us what really made him call us. A couple days later was the guy, Harold Smith, his name, came back into the apartment and asked him if he can borrow $1. He goes, what do you need $1 for? He goes, I need to take a bus to Beverly Hills. He goes, what's in Beverly Hills? It was my bicycle. Now that was significant. And that's what the tipster said convinced him that Harold was involved. Because right after Harold left his apartment the previous night, he turned on the television and saw that there was a murder. And that's all the television was talking about. It was in Beverly Hills. He didn't immediately put everything together, but he said, why is my apartment neighbor acting so suspicious right after this big thing happened? Isn't that interesting? Harold was known for riding his bike around and stuff like that. So the next morning when he came in and said, I got to go pick up my bike in Beverly Hills, the tipster said, oh, man, it's got to be him. I know he's a 2-time loser. I know he's done other things, and he's acting so suspiciously. I need to at least have him checked out because I have a gut feeling. And as the tipster said, look, I'm not a snitch. He certainly, I could tell you this, he's not a friend of law enforcement. He had his own issues, but he just felt like there was something going on. Harold had stored some boxes of stuff in his apartment because he was being kicked out of the Harvey. And so he knew he'd probably be back. And that's what he told us. He still didn't want his name used. He just, we made that promise, you can remain anonymous. I'd say the Beverly Hills Police really pushed us for his name. And we really pushed Nine of Hearts to come forward. And finally, he said, if they can guarantee that I'll remain anonymous to police, I'll go meet with them. I'll tell them what I know. And that did happen. And then after that, what happened, which we're about to talk about. But I went out to LA and actually met the tipster and gave him a business card. And we sat down. We were going to meet with the Beverly Hills Police together. And my job was to try to convince him to come on the air and tell us, his story on our show. And then forget it. We sat down and I gave him my business card and he handed me a Nine of Hearts from a deck of cards that he had bought. And he still then, we went and talked to the Beverly Hills Police. at that point together, because we were doing a follow-up story, but he still didn't want his name used. I mean, he just was a guy doing the right thing, and he wasn't in it for the publicity or anything like that. He just, he just wanted to do the right thing. And anyway, that's my recollection of the tip.
Can you tell us about the tipster's relationship with the suspect?
Yeah, they were neighbors. I mean, they were friendly. The tipster, and I learned a lot of this later. I know we're going to talk about him in particular, and we'll use his name. I don't know if you've done that yet. All he told us at the time was that this was a neighbor that he knew, and knew well enough to know that he was generally a nice guy. He knew he had some kind of police record. He knew that he was known to ride a bicycle around all over the place. And he trusted him well enough to let him store some stuff in his house. And I just remember one of the things that he told us was that the morning when he said he needed the dollar for the bus ride, he said, "If I don't come back by Friday, you could just take my stuff and it be yours or whatever, because it means I'm gone." And the tipster told us, like, he said to him, if you're feeling depressed or suicidal or whatever, there's help that you can get. He was concerned about him a little bit, and the guy Harold said to him, "I'm good, it's okay." And that's the last conversation they had.
How credible do you consider the tipster's account of Harold Smith's actions after the night of the murder?
We felt at America's Most Wanted that it was very credible. As I said, the operators who took the calls from the public were pretty well trained. We didn't just put anybody on those calls. You had to go through a training program, and most of them had been there for years, frankly, longer than me. I mean, I started working there in the year of 2000, and most of the operators had been there 10 years already when I got there, and were still there when the show went off the air 10 years later. So there's certain things that they would listen for, tone of voice, and they would ask them, questions. Now, the first night that he called, it wasn't a long conversation because he didn't go into detail. But when he called back, they would ask him to repeat the story and ask for certain details that just told us that he was telling the truth, that he was credible. I should say, we told him, there's a reward been announced, and he said, I didn't know that. That wasn't his motivation. He just thought that Harold, if Harold did this, there were other people living in that building that could be in danger, and he just wanted it to at least be looked into. So we thought it was pretty credible. He didn't come across as anything but totally honest broker. And they said, we talked to tipsters, everything from kids doing prank calls, which took about usually 10 seconds to figure out, to the actual perpetrator calling our hotline and just trying to suss out what we know. So we've had, we used to get the whole gamut of calls, and this just seemed like a credible one. And normally what happens is, if, say, there's 20 calls on a certain case on a night, our operator trained to say to law enforcement, take a look at this one. Here's all 20. They're yours. It's your information. But take a look at this one, because it just seems like it's like on the money. And that was the case with this one.
In the meantime, the first piece of evidence was leaked to Fox 11 Los Angeles. During a November 24th newscast on KTTV, a 3-page coroner's report was shown reading, one bullet was recovered from her back while at the hospital and is possible from a 9mm hollow point. 2 days later, LA County Coroner spokesperson confirmed to CNN that the leaked document shown on KTTV appeared to be authentic. He also said the report was written by investigators in order to help the doctor who would perform a full autopsy the day after the murder. Back to Gil Carrillo, retired homicide lieutenant, 38 years with the LA County Sheriff's Department. What do you remember about speaking on the case back then?
Well, I didn't pay attention much to the news coverage, because to a homicide investigator, a murder is a murder. It doesn't matter how famous, or whether it's a transient or a well-known, world-renowned actress or publicist. It was a murder. The thing that made this unusual is you don't have many murders in the city of Beverly Hills. It was unusual that there was a murder in Beverly Hills. You don't hear about that all the time. And my only interest in it was because I got called and asked if I would be willing to go take a look at what they had. And I was called by the news media, not by Beverly Hills Police Department. I'm sure Beverly Hills, the last thing they would do would be call in some outside agency on a single murder like that. They're extremely competent. They wouldn't have called me, so it was the news media that called me. I got down there, did a stand-up interview with Fox, and that was it. I did one stand-up with Fox. They asked the questions. I gave them answers, but I also reiterated to them that nobody knows the case as well as the investigators handling it. At this point in time, anything I had to say would be purely speculative. It's not my case. I don't know the intimate details of the case. I don't know anything about the victimology of the case other than she's a publicist, a well-known publicist. And that's about it at that time.
You were quoted on ABC Nightline as saying you thought the murder looked like a hit based on the lead coroner's report. Can you tell us how you made that assessment?
Well, at the time, with the limited information I have, you had a very small shot group. My recollection says maybe 3 shots, a small shot group. The location of where it was at, the city of Beverly Hills. How did they catch this publicist at that intersection at that time on her way home? She had just left some big public event, so somebody had to have knowledge of her whereabouts. In my opinion, this is not a location where you see a transient riding a bike in any part of Beverly Hills, much less a transient riding a bike that could shoot a gun that could get a small shot group. Quite honestly, I don't know that I could have gotten a shot group that small. I'm supposed to be trained.
Outside the murder for hire possibility, there were multiple theories being rumored to the press about Miss Chasen's death. Early in the aftermath, including stories about gambling debts, Russian mob hit, disgruntled film investors, Hollywood jealousy. Joshua Ritter, criminal defense attorney and former LA County Deputy District Attorney, host of his own podcast, True Crime Daily, Sidebar Podcast. You can find him on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Joshua Ritter ESQ. What kind of impact can leaks have on an investigation once information gets to the media?
Well, especially on a case like this that has so much public interest, it can have a huge impact because you are going to have people who are going to start to speculate. You do have unusual circumstances to begin with. You have a murder taking place in an unlikely area against a person that there doesn't seem to be any reason why she would be targeted. You've now got a suspect that doesn't seem to line up with some of the theories surrounding the case and the investigation being done. And then when you start to get these whispers of evidence that come out and people are jumping to conclusions, it's going to create a lot of speculation. And I imagine it created a lot of headache for Beverly Hills PD to have to deal with all of these kind of conspiracy theories and tipsters trying to add their insights onto where this investigation should lead them.
How much do you think the leaked coroner's report impacted the coverage of the case and what the public thought about the murder?
I think it added fuel to that fire already, where people were already so kind of intrigued with this murder, taking place in Beverly Hills, involving the person that it did, her kind of status amongst the celebrities in Hollywood, and then to just get a glimmer of some of the evidence being leaked, just the fact that it's leaked evidence, I think it just kind of added to that overall kind of media frenzy and speculation that was surrounding the case.
1 week later, the case took an unexpected turn. On December 1st, Beverly Hills Police entered the Harvey Apartment on Santa Monica Boulevard with a warrant for Harold Smith. Here's what happened according to the LAPD Captain Kevin McClure.
At about 5:30 this afternoon, Hollywood Division received a phone call from Beverly Hills Police Department that they were conducting a follow-up investigation of the Harvey Apartments here on Santa Monica. While conducting that follow-up, the person that they were looking for showed up. They attempted to talk to the suspect. When they did, the suspect produced a handgun, and there was a self-inflicted gunshot wound at that point in time.
So while LA Police Department is investigating an apparent suicide, Beverly Hills Police said it was a person of interest in Miss Chasen's investigation. We now know that person was Harold Smith. So who was Harold Smith? In the next episode of our 6-part series, we'll examine the person of interest, his alleged connection to Miss Chasen's murder, if this was still a possible murder for hire, plus what else do we know about what happened at the Harvey that night? Join us.